The air smelled of ash and sweat as the crowd stared. James Carter said, "It's gone. Everything we built vanished." He was once a rising entrepreneur, now standing under the harsh white lights of a press conference. Reporters swarmed like vultures, cameras flashing in his face. His voice trembled, but his jaw clenched. He thought of the years, the sacrifices, and the dreams collapsing with each question shouted at him. The betrayal by his closest ally echoed in his mind, slicing deeper than financial loss. His chest ached as silence fell, and his own words rang out louder than the chaos. "This is not the end. You'll remember me for what comes next." The press hall emptied, leaving only echoes. James sat alone at the podium, staring at crumpled notes. His chest rose and fell slowly, each breath heavier than the last. Sarah said, "James, you need to face it. It's over." He turned his head sharply, voice cracking but laced with steel. "No. Over is when I stop fighting. And I haven't even started yet." He imagined the betrayal again, Michael's smirk gnawing at him. Shame burned his cheeks, but beneath it, a fire grew hotter. His hand clenched into a fist on the table as he whispered to himself, "They think I'm finished. I'll show them what survival looks like." The next morning, sunlight cut through blinds, sharp and unforgiving. James sat in his cramped office, coffee cold on the desk, phone buzzing non-stop with headlines about his failure. Richard Gray said, "You're drowning, James, but storms end. Do you still believe in your product?" James leaned forward, rubbing his temples. "Believe? It's all I have left." His reflection in the window looked older, worn. His voice softened as he whispered, "If I don't fight, the story ends here, and I won't let Michael write my ending." James walked into his apartment, walls bare, silence heavy. He dropped his bag, collapsed onto the couch, and stared at the ceiling. His phone buzzed with his mother's message. "Come home, stop this madness." He muttered, "They'll never understand." A voice in his mind hissed with doubt, reminding him of every failure. Yet in that silence, he replayed his words at the podium, "This is not the end." The line echoed, steadying him. He clenched his jaw and whispered, "If survival means burning everything, then I'll burn brighter than the storm." Late at night, rain tapped the window. James scribbled frantically on papers, blueprints spread across the table. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but his hand moved faster, fueled by desperation. He muttered, "This product, it's still alive." Thunder rolled outside, masking his whisper. "They'll laugh now, but soon they'll need me." His sketches were messy but bold, ideas too wild to dismiss. A single desk lamp glowed, casting shadows like ghosts of his failures. But in that light, James' determination sharpened. He leaned back, whispering, "I risked everything. I won't waste it." James sat at his childhood desk, the wood chipped and uneven. The air smelled faintly of old books and dust. He traced his fingers over a faded notebook filled with messy sketches from years ago. He whispered, "This is where it all started." His mother's voice lingered in his memory, urging him to abandon dreams for safety. But even as a boy, he had refused. Richard Gray once told him, "Childhood dreams aren't foolish if they survive the fire of doubt." James smiled bitterly, remembering nights spent drawing prototypes by flashlight. Every rejection, every cruel word, seemed to carry him back here, reminding him of the raw fire that fueled him from the very beginning. In a dusty garage, James ran his hands over an old metal frame, the prototype of his first failed product. The cold steel felt heavier now than it ever had. Sarah Mitchell said, "You always wanted to change the world with scraps and sparks." James laughed softly, voice tinged with pain. "And they said it was impossible." His reflection, caught in a cracked mirror, leaned against the wall. He saw a man who once believed he could defy gravity itself, now chained by defeat. Yet in that reflection, he caught something else. The same wild hunger that had driven him years ago. James sat in a cafe where he had once pitched to empty ears. The same chip table, the same stale smell of burnt coffee. Michael Hayes had once leaned across this very table, smiling like an ally. The memory burned. Richard Gray said, "You carried too much weight alone, James. No one wins that way." James stared into his coffee cup, voice flat. "And no one wins with traitors either." His pulse quickened. The cafe's hum of chatter faded under his thoughts. He replayed the laughter from those who had dismissed him, and he muttered, "They didn't see it then. They will now." That night, James sat across from his sister, Emily Carter. She stirred tea nervously, avoiding his eyes. Emily said, "You're throwing your life away, James. You could still get a normal job, something safe." He bit his lip, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Normal isn't for me, Emily." The silence between them stretched. She looked at him like he was lost in a storm with no sail. Her words cut deeper than the betrayal of business partners because they came wrapped in love. He whispered, "I'd rather fail chasing my dream than succeed living someone else." James met Richard under flickering streetlights. The city hummed in the distance, neon signs glowing. Richard said, "You don't just build products, James. You build futures. That's why people follow visionaries." James exhaled, his breath visible in the cold night air. "Vision doesn't pay the bills," he muttered. Richard stepped closer, his tone sharp. "Neither does surrender." James' pulse steadied, his eyes lifting toward the skyline. The skyscrapers stood like impossible challenges, but also like invitations. He clenched his fists, whispering, "Then I'll build something they can't ignore." For the first time in weeks, the fire felt real again. The boardroom buzzed with murmurs as James laid out his product pitch. His slides flickered on the screen, bold words and numbers flashing with conviction. Yet across the table, Sarah Mitchell tapped her pen nervously, eyes clouded with hesitation. "James," she said, "your vision is powerful, but the market isn't ready. Investors won't risk it." His throat tightened, but he forced a steady reply. "Markets don't decide the future. Innovators do." Her gaze dropped, and the silence stretched like a blade between them. James' hands trembled under the table, but his voice rang out, "If they won't believe now, I'll make them regret later." James left the building, only to be met by news of a broken deal. His phone buzzed with the message. The partnership he had fought for was gone. Rain began to pour, soaking his suit as he stood frozen on the sidewalk. Richard Gray joined him, umbrella in hand, saying, "This is the weight of chasing giants. Do you still want to carry it?" James let the rain wash over his face, and answered, "I'd rather drown carrying it than survive without it." His words tasted like both defiance and desperation. The storm outside mirrored the one inside, and he knew the night would test him more than ever. In a dimly lit co-working space, James confronted Michael Hayes. The man who once stood at his side now leaned back, smug. Michael said, "I waited long enough, James. Dreams don't pay debts, but betrayal does." James' fists tightened, veins pulsing as he replied, "You were my partner, Michael. You turned loyalty into poison." Michael laughed quietly, his voice dripping with disdain. The room felt smaller, the shadows heavier, as James realized this wasn't just betrayal, it was war. His vision blurred, but his words cut through. "I'll rebuild from the ashes you left, and you'll choke on your victory." The rival company unveiled their product in a lavish event. Screens glowed bright, music thundered, and the crowd cheered as the CEO boasted. James stood in the back, watching the spectacle unfold. His chest burned with anger, not at the product, but at the audacity. Richard's voice echoed in his head, "You're fighting not just men, but the system built to keep you out." The rival CEO pointed at the crowd, shouting, "We own the future." James whispered bitterly, "Not for long." The lights blinded him, but beneath them, he carried a darkness sharper than steel, the kind born of resolve. Alone in his apartment, James sank into his chair, hands gripping his head. The failures, betrayals, and losses crashed down like waves. He whispered, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm chasing smoke." Emily's voice replayed in his mind, pleading with him to stop. His chest tightened, tears stung, but then he looked at the sketches scattered across his desk. His lips trembled as he muttered, "No, This isn't smoke. This is fire. He forced himself to sit straighter, eyes red but sharp. Exhaustion battled with will, but for the first time, will refused to break. He whispered again, louder, "I won't stop." The study smelled of old wood and smoke, its silence broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock. James leaned forward, his knuckles white on the armrest. Richard's voice was hoarse, every word weighted with guilt. "I knew about Michael's betrayal long before it reached you. I watched it unfold and did nothing." James' face drained, disbelief hardening into rage. "You knew, and let me walk into the fire blind." Richard's eyes glistened with shame. "I thought pain would forge strength. I gambled with your trust." The betrayal layered deep, twisting inside James like a blade. He wanted to scream, but instead whispered, "You broke me to rebuild me. Let's pray I rise stronger than you planned." The rival tower glittered like a monument to arrogance, glass walls glowing against the night. James stormed in, clothes still damp from the rain. Michael leaned against his sleek desk, skyline blazing behind him, smirk sharp as a blade. "Loyalty? That's a word for fools," he said, brushing invisible dust off his watch. "I took your blueprints, James. They're mine now. Your dream lives under my name." James' chest heaved, rage burning hotter than the neon lights outside. "Steal what you want," he growled, "but you can't steal the fire that built it." Michael chuckled coldly. "Fire burns out. Ownership endures." James turned, voice trembling with fury. "Then watch me ignite the future without you." Back in his apartment, James pressed the phone tight against his ear, the city buzzing below like a mocking choir. Sarah's tone was colder than ice. "The board voted, James. I can't back you anymore. It's over." He stood frozen, neon light painting streaks across his face. "You swore you believed in me," he muttered, voice cracking. Sarah's reply cut sharp, "Belief doesn't save sinking ships." The line went dead, silence swallowing him whole. His reflection stared back from the rain-streaked window, hollow-eyed, broken. He clenched the phone until his knuckles whitened, whispering to himself with a bitter edge, "If they walk away now, they'll crawl back when they see what I've built." Emily sat across the table, her hands wrapped tightly around a chipped mug, knuckles pale. Her voice trembled as she pleaded, "You're killing yourself, James. You've lost everything. Why can't you just stop?" James leaned forward, his eyes dark hollows, voice sharp but steady. "Because stopping would kill me faster than failing ever could." Emily blinked back, tears shaking her head. "You could still live a normal life. Safe, simple, steady. Isn't that enough?" His laugh was dry, bitter. "Normal is a coffin with the lid painted pretty. I'd rather burn alive chasing this than suffocate slowly in safety." She fell silent, her love warring with her fear, as James whispered, "You'll understand when it's too late to stop me." The storm outside raged, lightning slashing the sky, but James didn't look up. He sat hunched over his desk, sketches scattered like fallen soldiers. His pen carved lines furiously, hands shaking but unstoppable. "They've taken my money, my allies, my trust," he whispered, sweat dripping onto the paper, smearing the ink. "But they'll never take this." The desk lamp cast sharp shadows that danced like ghosts across the walls, whispering of past failures. His jaw set, teeth grinding as he pressed harder, tearing the page beneath. "This design," he muttered, "isn't just an idea. It's my resurrection." His eyes burned red, exhaustion and determination colliding as lightning outside mirrored the spark within him. The loft looked like the mind of a desperate man laid bare, sketches on the floor, wires hanging from half-assembled models, the glow of monitors flickering against cracked walls. James stood in the middle, chest tight, his breath shallow as he stared at the blueprint he had redrawn 100 times. His voice cracked as he muttered, "This is all I have left." Richard entered quietly, rain dripping from his coat, and studied him with unflinching eyes. "Vision alone won't protect you tomorrow, James. You'll stand before men who measure lives in profit." James clenched his fists, eyes locked on the papers. "Then I'll become something they can't measure. I'll become the fire that leaves no doubt." The city's billboards became weapons, each headline crafted to crush his name. Michael's smug grin stretched across giant digital screens, the words reckless, unstable, and failure pulsing in bold letters. James stopped on the sidewalk, drenched in neon light, as whispers from strangers curled like knives around him. "That's the guy from the news," someone muttered. "He's finished." His chest burned with fury, but also a strange calm. He whispered through gritted teeth, "Every lie you throw is kindling, and I'll turn it into the fire that burns your empire down." His steps grew heavier, louder, as if the city itself could feel him pushing back against its judgment. The workspace buzzed with quiet focus. Daniel, the silent engineer who had worked in the shadows, hunched over a circuit board, his steady hands betraying no fear. James watched him, astonished at the calm in a man who had rarely spoken more than a few words. Daniel finally broke the silence, voice firm but quiet. "This will work. I've tested it again and again. Trust me." James blinked, realizing loyalty didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered and kept building even when no one noticed. He said softly, "You're the strength I didn't know I had." Daniel looked up briefly, eyes steady behind his glasses, and simply nodded. In that silence, James felt less alone. The rooftop felt like a stage before battle, wind whipping through James' hair, neon lights stretching across the skyline below. Richard stood beside him, his coat flapping in the night air, voice sharp as iron. "Tomorrow is not just about a pitch. It's about who you are when everything is stripped away." James gripped the railing, eyes locked on the towering skyscrapers like giants waiting to crush him. He whispered, "If I fall tomorrow, let it be fighting for something worth burning for." Richard's gaze softened, his hand gripping James' shoulder. "Then fight with fire and wisdom, not fire alone. That is how legends are forged." James exhaled slowly, ready to face the storm. The conference hall was vast and merciless, its lights glaring like judgment. Rows of investors sat in silence, faces blank masks of profit and doubt. James stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding so loud he feared they could hear it. Each step echoed like a drumbeat of defiance. Michael Hayes lounged in the front row, smirk curling as though he'd already won. James gripped the podium, sweat cold on his palms. He whispered, "They think I'll break, but tonight I rise." His eyes swept the room, catching Emily's anxious face, Richard's steady gaze, and Sarah's conflicted expression in the back. The weight of betrayal and faith pressed together, but his voice rose clear. "What I bring you tonight is the future they told me to bury. Watch it rise." The hall closed in like a fortress, the heavy doors sealing behind James as silence rippled across the audience. His chest hammered, but his hands didn't shake as he set the prototype on the table, its polished surface catching the stage lights. Michael leaned back in his seat, arms folded, smug grin curving his mouth as if the night belonged to him. Sarah tapped her pen against a pad, her eyes shifting between James and the board. Richard stood in the aisle, his presence steady, a silent anchor in a sea of judgment. James said, "You came expecting numbers, but what you'll leave with is vision." The crowd leaned forward. Michael chuckled. James added sharply, "Slides don't save anyone. Proof does." The screen lit up with contracts, timestamps and code signatures, each piece fitting together like a knife to Michael's throat. Gasps spread through the room as James spoke with crisp certainty. "This is theft. Not chance. Not accident. Theft." Michael forced a laugh, his voice too thin. "Coincidences dressed in data." Richard said firmly, "Patterns don't lie." Sarah leaned closer, eyes scanning the projected details, her lips pressing thin as she recognized the undeniable trail. Daniel held up his tablet, voice calm but cutting. "Hash values match across builds." The smug mask slipped from Michael's face. James said, "You didn't outpace me. You mirrored me." Silence thickened into truth, pressing down on the rival. For a long moment, the room swayed in uneasy silence, until Sarah rose. Her chair scraped loudly, snapping the hush. "I pulled support when faith looked like recklessness, she said, her voice cutting through the air. She turned to James. I wasn't wrong about the vision. I was wrong about my own courage. Michael barked from the front row, this is theater. James shot back without hesitation, sit with your silence, Michael. Sarah raised her chin, addressing the board directly. We either correct course tonight or lose the future he's building. Richard gave a single approving nod. Daniel whispered, all systems stable. James lifted the device, his voice steady. Now, let the work speak louder than I can. James moved from podium to table, each step heavy, deliberate, echoing across the hushed hall. He placed the prototype center stage under a blinding white light. His voice cut the air. No edits, no safety net. You get proof, or you get my ruin. Daniel whispered from behind, subsystems green, ready. Michael leaned forward with a predator's grin. And when it fails, you'll be finished before you begin. James ignored him, fingers dancing across the controls. He said, this design doubles throughput, cuts cost, reduces waste. Graphs began to climb on screen, lights flickering across glass walls. Investors leaned forward, faces shifting from doubt to awe. Richard whispered softly, so this is what faith looks like. The numbers climbed past thresholds, the screen pulsing with green lights. Then came the chime, soft but earth-shaking. James exhaled like a man surfacing from deep water. Target met. Stretch exceeded, he said, voice trembling yet proud. All's began as a ripple and rose into thunder. Michael stood, face drained, stammering, rigged, staged. Daniel snapped back, voice sharp, logs mirror to external servers in real time. Tampering is impossible. Sarah stepped forward, voice resolute. I reinstate my backing with full authority. This company deserves its future. Richard smiled faintly, lines of pride etched deep. James looked out at the sea of faces and said, you asked for certainty. Tonight you got proof, and more importantly, courage. The echoes of applause still clung to the hall as James walked off stage. The prototype was cradled in his arms like a fragile child, but his steps carried the weight of someone who had just clawed through fire. Richard met him in the hallway, his voice low and steady. The hardest storms never leave you clean, but they do leave you forged. James' chest rose with a long, uneven breath. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel suffocating. Sarah followed, her tone softer than before. I doubted you, but I won't doubt again. James nodded once, exhaustion heavy in his eyes. He whispered, we're not finished. We've only just begun. The next morning, headlines blazed with a different name. James Carter. The underdog who redefined the market, the article read. Michael's empire cracked overnight, his face plastered on news feeds with words like fraud and collapse. James sat at his kitchen table, coffee steaming, eyes scanning the papers with a quiet disbelief. Emily placed her hand over his, her voice trembling but proud. I was wrong. You're not destroying yourself. You're building something greater than any of us imagined. James smiled faintly, the fatigue still deep, but the fire untamed. He whispered, this is only the first victory. The war is still ahead. Later that week, James visited his childhood home. He walked into the old garage where rusted prototypes still lay under dusty sheets. He ran his fingers along the worn metal, remembering every failure, and every night, he worked by flashlight. Daniel joined him quietly, hands still carrying grease from the new lab. James said, this is where it began. A boy with nothing but scraps and a dream. Daniel replied, and now, scraps became steel, and steel became fire. James exhaled, closing his eyes. Every mistake lives here, but so does the proof that I never stopped trying. He smiled faintly. That's why I'll never stop. The boardroom now felt different. James stood at the head of the table, not as a desperate dreamer, but as a leader with a proven fire. Around him, Sarah leaned forward with sharp focus, Richard's presence still steady as stone, Daniel quietly monitoring results. Investors who once doubted him now scribbled notes furiously, their eyes glued to his words. James said, "What we create next will not just disrupt markets, it will redefine them. But we must hold to integrity, because without it, we become the very people we fought against." The room fell silent, their respect palpable. He had become the anchor of the storm. At sunset, James stood alone on the rooftop of his building, the city glowing beneath him. The sky burned in streaks of orange and violet, the storm finally gone. He closed his eyes, the memory of betrayal still etched deep, but the triumph heavier. He whispered to himself, "They wanted me broken, they'll remember me unshaken." His phone buzzed with messages of deals, praise, and opportunity, but he let it rest in his pocket. This moment wasn't about profit. It was about survival, resilience, and the courage to keep rising. He opened his eyes, the skyline blazing like a promise. "This is only the beginning," he said, voice firm against the wind.